They shot my daughter 3 times in broad daylight, while she held up her phone and begged them not to pull the trigger. She was 17, unarmed, filming a protest, and they pulled the trigger anyway because they thought she was just another black girl with an attitude. What they didn't know was that her father was a retired Delta Force commander trained to dismantle governments from the inside out. And this time I wasn't fighting in Iraq. I was fighting in Detroit, and I was fighting for her. They say the world changes in a blink. But I swear, when I heard those gunshots, time didn't blink, it shattered. The first crack of the pistol sounded like a firework, except no one was celebrating. The second, closer, sharper, ripped through the silence. And the third, that one felt like it pierced my own heart. I didn't see the bullets. I saw her, my daughter Ariel, spinning like a dancer caught mid-twirl, her curly hair catching the sunlight one last time before her body slammed into the concrete. She was 17. She was unarmed. She was mine. And they shot her like she was nothing. The street went quiet, just that eerie kind of quiet you hear right after something sacred has been violated. Behind the smoking gun stood a man in blue, Sergeant Will Greer, breathing hard, his hands still trembling around his weapon. He didn't look sorry. He didn't even look human. Standing behind him, clutching her clipboard like it was a sword of justice, was Deputy Chief Darlene Monroe. Sunglasses, immaculate black suit. Lips pressed tight like she'd already planned the press release. She moved too fast, Greer muttered. She reached for something. I screamed, but no sound came out. My name is Nathaniel Cross. I'm a father. I'm a widower. I'm a mechanic on the corner of 5th and Washburn in Detroit. I fix cars. I build shelves. I make coffee every morning at 5:12 a.m. The same way I learned to in Baghdad, 1 spoonful of instant 2 fingers of boiling water. And I used to be a ghost. That's what they called me back in Delta Force. Ghost. I was the man who made the impossible disappear. 41 confirmed operations, 13 countries, 0 civilian casualties. Not once did I ever let an innocent get caught in the crossfire. I didn't survive all that for this to watch my daughter bleed on the same soil I bled for. I didn't bury brothers in arms just so a man like Greer could draw his gun faster than his breath. Ariel. God, she was so full of light. And stubborn as a bull in July. She wanted to be a lawyer. Said she'd fight the system from the inside out. I used to laugh at that. She never backed down from debate, never softened her voice to be more palatable. That scared me, if I'm honest. Not because she was wrong, because I knew the world eats girls like her alive, but I never imagined it would shoot her. The paramedics came. I followed them, hands shaking heart in free fall. The officers formed a wall between me and her stretcher. Like I was the threat. I looked into their eyes empty. Like I wasn't a father. Like I wasn't a man. Like I was a statistic they'd read in their training manual. She's critical, one nurse whispered. You need to pray, but I'd stopped praying years ago. That night I sat in the hospital waiting room. The fluorescent lights buzzed like angry wasps. The coffee tasted like rust. Ariel was in surgery. 12 hours and counting. I kept my hands clasped together, not in prayer, but in control. Because if I let go even for a second, I'd do something I couldn't take back. I stared at the police tape on my clothes. I didn't change. I wanted their shame on me. I wanted the bloodstains to burn into my memory. A rookie reporter approached me at dawn. Mr. Cross, is it true your daughter had a weapon? I stood up. The look in my eyes made her take 2 steps back. She had a phone, I said. She was live streaming. Her last words are probably on someone's timeline. She left, coward. By 9 a.m., the news had already framed the story. Teen involved in police incident suspected of resisting. Incident, like it was a traffic jam. 2 days later, Ariel was still unconscious. Tubes in her mouth, bruises on her throat. And I sat beside her thinking about all the things I never told her, like how I used to hide my medals so she wouldn't ask questions, or how I cried the first time she brought home a Know Your Rights flyer from school, or how I used to stand outside her bedroom door some nights listening to her breathe just to be sure I hadn't lost everything. And now they'd tried to take her. I remembered a quote from my last deployment. An insurgent I'd interrogated once said, "The quiet ones are the deadliest. They watch, then they strike." They'd mistaken me for a quiet man. On the third morning, I got a visitor, Father Elijah from the community center. He sat beside me silent for a while. I watched the video, he said. I looked at him. "You," he nodded. "She didn't do anything. Just stood there." "But you already knew that, didn't you?" I clenched my jaw. "Elijah," I whispered, "I can't lose her." "I know," he said, placing a worn hand on my shoulder. "But you can't lose yourself either." I wanted to scream. I wanted to break every piece of that room. But instead, I stood up, kissed Ariel's forehead, and whispered, "Sleep, baby. Daddy's got work to do." On my way out of the hospital, a voice caught me. She had a record, right? It was Officer Melina Hart. I stopped, turned slowly. She flinched. "No," I said. "But you will." Her face went pale. Outside, the wind cut sharp. But it was nothing compared to what I felt inside. They'd declared war on my child. And in doing so, they woke a man who had buried the part of him the military created. A part he swore he'd never use again. They thought I was just another black father, another mourning statistic. But they were wrong. I wasn't just a father. I was a weapon, and now I had a target. The hallway smelled like bleach and grief. Nurses passed me with practiced pity. Machines beeped with hollow rhythm. I stared through the ICU glass at my daughter's still body, her chest rising slowly under a thin white blanket. Tubes ran like tangled wires from her arms, her mouth, her neck. I counted every breath she took, every breath she almost didn't. That girl in that bed wasn't just my child. She was my reason, my redemption. The reason I hadn't gone completely mad after losing my wife in that car crash 6 years ago. The reason I walked away from a career that made me a legend and a ghost. Back then, they called me the Quiet Hammer. The one who knocked down doors without a sound. The one who didn't miss. The one who never cracked under pressure. But I did crack. Ariel did that to me. She taught me softness in a world that only respected steel. She made me feel something again. Now they'd tried to take her, and I had to remember how to become the hammer again. I spent the next day alone in my garage under the hood of a rusted Dodge that hadn't started in a year. I wasn't fixing it. I just needed grease under my fingernails. I needed the illusion of normal, but the past wouldn't leave me alone. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her fall. Every time I turned on the radio, I heard talking heads debate whether the shooting was justified. Every time I heard the word investigation, I wanted to scream. That's when I remembered rule number 1 from Delta. If the mission fails, it's because you didn't gather enough intel. So I started digging. The officers. Sergeant Will Greer. Decorated for a drug bust in 2019. Internal Affairs complaint in 2021. Use of excessive force. Closed with no consequences. suspended for 1 week in 2022 after punching a teenager during a stop. Quietly reinstated. Officer Melina Hart. Rookie. Clean record. Hesitant. The type who follows the lead of louder voices even if they're wrong. The department, Detroit Central. Headed by Deputy Chief Darlene Monroe, reputation for being tough on crime and media-friendly. Translation ruthless behind closed doors, polished in front of cameras. She'd survived 3 scandals, all buried under technicalities and red tape. She was the red tape. And now she was protecting Greer like he was a prince, and she the gatekeeper of his throne. 3 days after the shooting, they held a press conference. Monroe took the stage, flanked by blue uniforms and empty promises. Her voice was sweet poison measured soft fake. There was an unfortunate escalation involving a young woman who failed to comply during a tense situation. We are conducting a full internal review. Our hearts go out to the family. The room clapped politely. Someone asked about body cam footage. She sidestepped the question like a dancer. Technical difficulties. We're reviewing backups. Bullshit. Ariel had been live streaming. Her phone was found shattered on the pavement camera lens, crushed memory card missing. They'd erased her. Tried to. But they forgot who her father was. I went to my basement that night. Opened a drawer I hadn't touched in 5 years. Inside were pieces of a man I swore I'd never be again. Encrypted hard drives, flash drives with photos, a folder labeled Classified Red Lintel Ops. They trained me to infiltrate enemy strongholds, decode terrorist chatter hack into encrypted files, using nothing but a soldering iron and a broken laptop. And I was damn good at it. I stared at a photo of me in full gear, back in Fallujah, scars across my arm, ash on my face, but eyes clear as steel. You want war, I muttered to no one. Fine. I started my own investigation. I found a traffic cam footage the department hadn't mentioned. Paid a hacker contact from my old days to decrypt corrupted video from a business across the street. The footage didn't lie. Ariel had her hands up. There was no weapon, no threat, only fear. I printed stills, circled timestamps, marked inconsistencies in police reports. And then I did something I hadn't done in over a decade. I put on a wire. On the 4th night, I walked into the precinct, not as a soldier, not as a father, as a grieving man, a man they'd underestimate. I asked to speak with Greer. He refused. I asked again. They called security. So I changed tactics. I waited outside the precinct parking lot until Officer Hart came out after her shift. She looked nervous, young. Like Ariel might have looked in a few years had they not. Officer Hart, I called gently. She froze. I'm Ariel Cross's father. She nodded slowly. I'm sorry, sir. I stepped closer. Not threatening. Just close enough for her to hear my whisper. I know she didn't do anything. So do you. She blinked hard, looked around. You shouldn't be here. Do you want to be complicit in this? I asked. Because inaction is action, officer. She looked like she might cry. Then she walked away. But that wasn't the end. The next day, I found an envelope taped to the hood of my truck. No return name. Inside, a printed document, unsigned. Preliminary incident report. It listed Ariel's aggressive behavior. But in the margins, written in shaky pen, were 3 words. She didn't move. That was my first crack in the wall. Back at the hospital, Ariel's vitals were stable, but she still hadn't woken up. I sat beside her and read aloud the names of all the officers I was going to hold accountable. Greer, Monroe, all of them. Baby girl, you hang in there. Just a little longer. Her fingers twitched. It might have been a reflex, or maybe it was her answer. Later that night, as I walked to my truck, I noticed a patrol car trailing me from a distance. Slow. Watching. It pulled beside me as I turned onto the freeway. I looked over. No sirens, just eyes behind the glass. They wanted me to know they were watching. But they didn't know who they were watching. I am not afraid. They trained me to live in the shadows, to dismantle empires with patience, precision, and silence. And that's what I would do now. Not with bombs, not with bullets, but with the truth. Because the quiet man they ignored. He just became the loudest threat they'd ever face. They didn't see me. They saw what they wanted to see: another black father weeping quietly by his daughter's bedside. Another name on a protest sign. Another headline people forget in a week. They didn't know my boots had crossed deserts with no names, that I had pulled men from burning convoys with bullets in my leg, that I once survived 6 days alone behind enemy lines with nothing but a knife, a map, and fury. They thought I was just another grieving black man, but I was grief with teeth. Ariel was still in the ICU, but something had changed. The twitch in her hand grew into a flutter of her eyelids. A nurse told me she might wake soon, and that meant I had a deadline, because once she opened her eyes, I wanted her to see justice already in motion, not another wall of silence. I studied the anonymous report Officer Hart left me. She didn't move the margin note read. But that single phrase scribbled in desperation became my leverage. I contacted a friend from my Delta days, Micah Reynolds. He owed me a life. Literally. We met in a beat-up diner just outside the city. He wore a baseball cap low over his scarred brow. "You're calling in the marker?" he asked quietly. I slid the report across the table. "I want to know what they're hiding. I want everything: body cam backups, erased footage, police transcripts." He glanced through it, jaw tightening. "This isn't a war zone, Nate." I looked him dead in the eye. "Yes, it is." While Micah worked his magic, I attended a city council meeting. Monroe stood at the front, smiling for cameras, flanked by officers in dress blues. I took a seat in the back. A woman with trembling hands stepped forward to speak. Her son had been arrested the week before. "He didn't resist," she said, voice shaking. But they still slammed his head on the pavement. People clapped politely. Monroe offered a plastic smile. "We appreciate your concerns." I stood up. My voice cut the air. "My name is Nathaniel Cross. My daughter was shot 3 times on this city's streets. She was unarmed. I have video that proves it. I have a timeline that destroys your lie." All heads turned. Monroe stiffened. "This department hides behind internal reviews. While burying children," I continued. "You're not protecting the people. You're protecting yourselves." She tried to speak. I raised my hand. "You talk about compliance." But my daughter complied. She raised her hands. She spoke calmly. She live-streamed so she'd have proof. "That's why you destroyed her phone. That's why you tried to erase her voice." The room erupted. Monroe's smile cracked. That night, I found my truck keyed in the hospital parking lot. Across the driver's side door, "Stay down." I didn't stay down. I stayed awake. Micah called me at 2:47 a.m. I found it. He sent me an encrypted file. Inside, corrupted body cam footage partially restored. No audio, just video. The frame shakes as Greer approaches Ariel. She holds up her hands. Her mouth moves calm. She doesn't flinch. She doesn't run. He raises his gun anyway. The timestamp reads 12:03, 17 p.m. Greer's report said 12:05:30. He lied. The shot was fired earlier, before backup arrived, before Monroe could write the narrative. I downloaded the clip. I watched it again, and again. Each frame a dagger, each second proof. I printed stills. I enlarged the frame showing her empty hands. I wrote a summary of every discrepancy in the report. And I mailed a copy to every member of City Council. Anonymous. Just the evidence. No letter. Let them wonder who sent it. Then I sent a copy to the media. They ignored it. So I decided to make noise another way. On the 6th day, I returned to the precinct. I wasn't armed, not with a gun, with questions. I stood outside holding a giant poster board. On it, a blown-up image from the body cam footage. Underneath, "This is compliance." So why did he shoot? People stopped, stared. Some took photos. A few joined me. Monroe sent officers out to monitor me. They stood 10 feet away, arms crossed, trying to intimidate. I didn't move. By noon, a small crowd had formed. By 3, the media showed up. I didn't yell. I didn't chant. I just stood there, and they couldn't arrest me for that. Not yet. That night I received a call. Private number. I answered. A woman's voice. Quiet. Afraid. "You need to stop." "Who is this?" "They're watching your daughter's room." I froze. "What did you say?" "They're trying to scare you. You're getting too close." They. Click. Line dead. I drove to the hospital in 15 minutes flat. Busted 3 red lights. I parked illegally and ran up 6 flights of stairs. I didn't wait for elevators. When I got to her room, 2 men were standing outside. Suits, sunglasses, not cops, not security. They looked up as I approached. I stared them down. "This is a restricted family area," one said. "I am family," I replied, stepping forward. They didn't stop me, but they didn't leave. I entered Ariel's room, shut the door, and pushed a chair under the knob. Then I leaned in, close to her ear. "You were right to fight," I whispered. "You knew they'd do this. You always knew." A single tear slid down her cheek. They thought they were watching me, but I was watching them. They thought I'd burn out, but I was just getting started. They thought I was alone, but they forgot something critical. I'm never alone. I've got ghosts on my side, and every single one of them owes me a favor. They poked the wrong man. No worse. They poked a ghost, and ghosts don't knock. They infiltrate. They observe. They wait. And then they strike when no one sees it coming. By the 7th day, I knew I wasn't just fighting for Ariel. I was fighting for every father who watched his daughter's future bleed into pavement. For every name turned into a hashtag. For every family buried beneath the weight of procedures and mistakes. But I didn't scream in the streets. That wasn't my warpath. I went dark. I met Micah again, this time inside an old shipping container 2 hours outside the city. No windows, no trackers, just us and 5 laptops running on an isolated network. On the wall was a corkboard covered in strings, photos, printed emails. "This," Micah said, pointing to a red circle, "is the leak." He'd traced a digital wipe back of Ariel's live stream. The phone's location pinged twice before going offline. Once at the scene. Once an hour later from the digital forensics room of the precinct, meaning someone intentionally deleted the footage. He zoomed in on a security log. "Look who logged in at 12:46 p.m. I stared at the name. D. Monroe. We had her. I leaned back, jaw clenched. "Can we restore anything?" "Fragments," Micah said. "And maybe audio. But it's messy." "Good," I muttered. "Let it be messy. Let them choke on the truth." The next day, I returned to my garage, but not to work. I pulled out an old duffel bag hidden in a false floorboard. Inside was a folder labeled Operation Steep Justice. It was from a mission in Kandahar, where we exposed a rogue commander falsifying raids and framing civilians. I'd collected evidence in silence, leaked it during a tribunal. That man went down in flames. That was the blueprint, and I was going to use it again. Meanwhile, Ariel was stirring more frequently. Still no words, but her eyes fluttered. Her fingers flexed. I held her hand every night and whispered, "The world's gonna look different when you wake up. I promise." But I knew I needed something big, something undeniable. That came from the most unexpected place. A janitor named Calvin who worked nights at the precinct. He showed up at my garage looking over his shoulder. Nervous, reeked of cleaning fluid. "I heard what happened to your girl," he said. I see things. Stuff I ain't supposed to. You know, they always think we're invisible." I nodded. He pulled out a flash drive. "Found this in the trash. Deep folder." It was almost overwritten. I plugged it in. The file was labeled Review Raw Backup Cam. When I opened it, my chest stopped moving. There was Monroe inside a dim precinct office standing in front of a monitor. The screen showed Ariel's footage clear as day. Her hands up. Her voice firm but respectful. Monroe's voice hissed from the recording. "Delete it. No one needs to see this. We control the narrative." She turned unaware the room camera was still rolling. "If he makes noise, we bury him in his military record. PTSD aggression, whatever. Plays well on TV." The clip ended. I burned 3 copies. One for the press, one for the DA, and one for me. But I wasn't ready to release it yet. I needed to make sure that when I did, it would explode like a thunderclap. The next step was bait. I filed a lawsuit, civil rights violation use of excessive force destruction of evidence. I filed it pro SE. No lawyer. That way, I could submit my own exhibits. The moment it hit the docket, Monroe called a private review board meeting. Invitation only. But I wasn't going to knock. I had other plans. Micah hacked into the live stream server for city council meetings. I prepared a 45-second edit of the deleted clip, just enough to punch. When Monroe stepped onto the podium that evening, full of smug self-assurance and media polish, I watched from a church across the street, streaming her face on my phone. She gave her usual speech. "We believe in accountability and transparency." That's when the screen behind her glitched and played the clip. Her voice echoed across the council chamber. "Delete it. We control the narrative." The room froze. Gasps, shouts. Council members scrambled. Monroe turned white. Her microphone cut off. The people saw it, and no one could unsee it. Within hours, it was all over the internet. "We control the narrative" was trending. The mayor demanded a full investigation. News vans lined the precinct sidewalk. Monroe called it fabricated, claimed it was deep-faked. Micah dropped the metadata and raw file timestamps on Reddit and 2 media servers. The clip's authenticity was irrefutable. She was done. That night, I returned to the hospital. 2 detectives were outside Ariel's room, not to intimidate, to apologize. "She's lucky to have you," one said. "No," I replied. "You're lucky I didn't become who I used to be." Inside, Ariel was awake, eyes open, tears streaming. She saw me, tried to speak, but I held her gently. "Shh. You're safe now." She blinked slowly, once, twice. Then she whispered, "You found it." I nodded. She closed her eyes, not from pain, from peace. They thought they could silence a girl with dreams and a phone. They thought her father was a relic. But what they didn't realize was that ghosts don't die. They wait, and when they come back, They bury the living with the truth. There was a time when I thought a badge meant something, that it stood for honor, duty, sacrifice. But now, every time I saw one pinned on a chest like Greer's or Monroe's, it felt like a knife twisting in my back. They wore those badges like shields, not to protect the people, but to protect themselves. But I had something stronger than a badge. I had the truth, and I had nothing left to lose. The morning after the footage leaked, my phone rang so many times I had to pull the battery. Journalists, lawyers, strangers, even a retired general who'd once promised me, "If you ever need something, I'll be there." He was the first person I called back. I met him at a federal building tucked between two office parks, a place with no signage, and guards who didn't wear names. General Cole still had the same storm-gray hair and dead-serious eyes. He walked like the floor should salute him. "I watched the footage," he said, "and I read your case files. This goes deeper than a trigger-happy cop." I nodded. "It's a machine, and Monroe's just the faceplate. She'll fall," he said. "But you want more than her. I want the rot ripped out by the root." He stared at me for a long second, then pulled out a slim black file. "What is this?" I asked. "Her federal background check. It'll tell you where to aim next." Inside was everything: campaign donors, lobby contacts, a private messaging thread where Monroe coordinated with a state senator to protect officers under investigation. "We don't need another Ferguson," she'd typed. I took a deep breath. Then I got to work. The lawsuit I filed gave me leverage. I could now subpoena body cam footage, radio logs, dispatch transcripts. They stalled, of course, so I filed a motion to compel. The media caught wind. Ariel's story was everywhere now, but not as a victim, as a spark. I walked into court that day wearing a plain black suit. No medals, no flag pin. Just resolve. On the other side of the courtroom, Monroe sat beside a high-priced legal team. Her hair was perfect. Her nails, too. But her eyes, they twitched. Sergeant Greer was nowhere to be seen. Coward. The judge reviewed the footage. Paused on the still frame of Ariel with her hands raised. "Let the record show," he said, "that the victim made no threatening gesture prior to discharge of the weapon." I stared at Monroe. She didn't blink, but she was unraveling. Then came the twist. Micah burst into the courtroom mid-session, whispered something to my ear. "Say it again," I demanded. "We found his file. Greer's. There's more." I turned to the judge. "Your Honor, I request permission to introduce new evidence." He raised a brow. "What kind?" I held up the flash drive. "The kind that proves this wasn't just a mistake. It was a strategy." On the screen, we played audio from a locker room mic accidentally activated the day before the shooting. Greer's voice, laughing. "They're going to start filming everything, huh?" Well, I got my own way of dealing with that. Another officer asked, "You serious?" Greer. They raise their phones. I raise my gun. One way or another, they drop it. The courtroom went silent. One of the jurors gasped. Even the judge's face paled. "This wasn't negligence," I said. "It was premeditated." They feared being recorded. And my daughter paid the price. By the time we left that courtroom, Monroe had been suspended pending investigation. Greer was placed under arrest by federal marshals before sunset. The moment his wrists were cuffed, I stood outside the courthouse watching. He looked at me through the window of the transport van. He didn't say a word, but I saw it in his eyes. He finally realized who I was. Not a grieving father, not a man in mourning, a force. Ariel watched the clip of Greer's arrest from her hospital bed that night. She was sitting upright now, breathing on her own, voice hoarse but clear. "They really thought they could kill me and call it paperwork," she whispered. I nodded. "They forgot who raised you." She smiled. It was weak, but it was real. Later that week, the mayor issued a statement. This city will pursue full accountability. We must rebuild trust. Monroe tried to hold a press conference. She was met with protesters holding mirrors in her face. She walked off stage in silence. The DA reached out next, offered a private settlement. I declined. I'm not here for money, I said. I'm here for change. So I proposed something else. Body cams, mandatory, no exceptions. Civilian oversight board with legal power. Community access to evidence logs. The DA blinked. You're serious? I don't need a badge, I said. I just need a spine. By the end of that month, policy reform passed in a record vote. Every precinct had new oversight. Every cop knew they were being watched. Not just by phones, by fathers. One afternoon, I returned to the hospital with a box in my hands. Ariel looked up from her bed. What's that? I pulled out a white hoodie, clean, untouched. It was the one she wore the day they shot her. Now washed, repaired. But across the back I had it printed. I survived. Now I speak. She touched the fabric gently. Let's go home, Dad. There's a sound you never forget. It's not a gunshot. It's not a siren. It's the sound of a gavel slamming down on a courtroom bench, followed by the silence of a city holding its breath. That was the sound I heard the day justice finally stopped whispering and started roaring. 2 months after the shooting, Ariel walked into the courthouse on her own 2 feet. She was thinner, paler, but she moved with purpose, head-high chin up the faint scar near her collarbone, a badge more honorable than any I'd ever worn. When she stepped up to the witness stand, a hush fell over the gallery. Cameras clicked, jaws tightened. Monroe sat across the room, still wearing that expensive suit, but no longer with the confidence it used to carry. Greer, shackled and expressionless, stared at the floor. I didn't look at them. I watched her. My daughter, my warrior. State your name for the record, the prosecutor said. Ariel Cross. And what happened on the afternoon of March 14th. She took a breath. I was walking home from a community meeting. I stopped at the corner of Marston and Hollis. A protest had just ended. I was filming the cleanup. Then they pulled up. Her voice never cracked. Officer Greer shouted for me to drop it. I said it was just my phone. I held it up to show him. Both hands visible. She paused, looked Greer square in the eye, and then he shot me. The room was stone still. No dramatics. No need. Truth doesn't need theater. After she stepped down, the defense scrambled. They showed pictures of a chaotic scene. Claimed miscommunication under pressure. Claimed fear. But the jury had already seen the footage. Heard Greer laugh about raising guns before phones. Heard Monroe order the deletion. Facts don't lie, and that terrified them. Then came the moment that broke everything wide open. Micah took the stand next. He explained how he uncovered the backup footage. Walked the jury through timestamps, digital fingerprints, file history. Every trail led back to Monroe. Every step she took was recorded. Deputy Chief Monroe, the prosecutor, said, "Did you authorize the deletion of body cam footage?" She hesitated. I acted within internal review protocols. He leaned in. That wasn't the question. She shifted, looked to her lawyer. No help. Did you order it deleted? Yes, she whispered. That whisper was louder than any siren. The gavel slammed down at 4:38 p.m. Verdict guilty. Greer, aggravated assault with intent to kill. Monroe, conspiracy to destroy evidence, obstruction of justice. Sentencing to follow. But their power, gone. Monroe's badge was stripped in front of the media. She tried to stand tall, tried to walk out with dignity. But when the courtroom doors opened, she met a wall of protesters. No chants, no screams. Just a silence so thick, so cold, it made her flinch. They turned their backs to her as she walked by, and for the first time in her career, no one followed. I stood beside Ariel on the courthouse steps, microphones shoved in our faces. "Mr. Cross, do you feel justice has been served?" I looked at my daughter. "I don't feel anything," I said, because this was never about feelings. It was about facts. "But what comes next?" another reporter asked. Ariel answered, "We rebuild, brick by brick, rule by rule. And this time, everyone gets to have a voice." That night, I returned home. For the first time in months, I turned off all the lights, lit a single candle, sat in my chair by the window, and I allowed myself to feel, to grieve, not just for Ariel, but for every father who didn't get to sit beside their child on the witness stand. A week later, the police department held a public meeting. Interim leadership, new rules, civilian review boards sworn in. I didn't speak. I just watched. As the badge Monroe once wore was placed in a glass case under the title Accountability Through Reform. No glory, no honor, just a reminder. But the moment that hit hardest came later. At the community center, where Ariel used to volunteer, they painted a mural across the side of the building. Ariel and a dozen others' names of those who fought and survived. And underneath it, in bold white letters, she raised her hands. So we raised our voices. That was the fall of the badge above the law. Not with fire, not with riots, but with truth, with tenacity, and with a girl who refused to die quietly. They say time heals, but time doesn't heal. Truth does, justice does, and peace. Peace isn't given. Peace is earned. It had been 6 months since Ariel was shot, 3 since Monroe was sentenced, 2 since Greer wept during his sentencing, claiming he never meant to pull the trigger. But we all saw the footage. The tape didn't flinch. The camera didn't lie. Intent is a shield cowards hide behind. Impact is what matters, and the impact of what they did to my daughter. It echoed farther than any of them could have imagined. Ariel was walking again, not smoothly, not without pain, but she walked. Every step was a statement, a strike against everything they'd tried to erase. She joined the youth council, held forums, trained teens on legal rights. She carried herself like steel wrapped in silk. She no longer asked for change. She demanded it. One warm autumn morning, we stood outside the newly renamed Ariel Cross Justice Center. What used to be a shuttered youth facility now bustled with energy. Counseling rooms, legal clinics, self-defense classes. A place built not by bureaucracy, but by community. I remember watching her cut the ribbon. She looked at me and whispered, "You fought for me." I shook my head. We fought for each other. I went back to my garage eventually, not to fix cars, but to teach kids how to. Hands-on work, something to ground them, something to keep them out of trouble. I never told them I used to dismantle bombs. Now I dismantled fear. The city changed. Little things. Cops started walking the streets without their hands on their holsters. They talked to kids instead of barking at them. A new chief was appointed someone with heart, not just credentials. Body cams became law. Ariel's case was cited in textbooks. Some called us heroes. We didn't need that. We just needed the system to stop eating its own people. One evening, I stood by the mural on the community center wall. It was lit softly by golden floodlights. Ariel's painted likeness gazed out with her hands raised, calm and clear. Below her, someone had added new words. She survived. So we could all rise. A young boy beside me pointed at the painting. "Is that her?" I nodded. "She looks strong." "She is," I said. "She made the world listen." He grinned. "I want to be like her." Later that night, as we sat on our porch watching the sun tucked behind the skyline, Ariel turned to me. You ever regret it? Getting involved? Taking them on? I exhaled. I regret waiting. She smiled. You didn't wait long. No, I said, staring at the stars. Just long enough to remind them who I really was. She nudged me. The ghost. I chuckled. No, I said. The Father. In this country, they want us to be quiet. They want us to move on. But peace isn't the absence of noise. Peace is the presence of justice. And sometimes to earn it, you have to shatter windows made of silence. Sometimes peace comes wrapped in rage carried by survivors. Sometimes peace walks with a limp and a bullet scar, and a girl who refused to die. I raised my coffee the next morning at 5:12 a.m., sharp, same as always. But this time it didn't taste like war. It tasted like home. What happened to Ariel wasn't just a tragedy, it was a turning point. They tried to take her life. They tried to silence her truth. They tried to erase her story and bury it under reports, excuses, and lies. But they forgot one thing. The truth doesn't die when it's protected by love. And justice doesn't stay quiet when a father refuses to kneel. This story isn't just about a shooting. It's about what happens next. It's about how we rise, the meaning of life. To protect what's precious. To fight for those who can't. To speak when silence becomes complicity. Because peace isn't something handed to you by the system. Peace is earned by those brave enough to confront the storm and still choose hope. If this story moved, you don't scroll away. Subscribe for more powerful, real-life inspired stories of justice, survival, and human courage. Comment below. What would you do if it was your daughter? Share this story because the world needs more people who refuse to stay silent. This is more than a video, it's a voice. Let's make it heard.